critical thinking is going to be most important skill. Everything else you can learn by talking to AI. Like if you don't know how to fix a leaking faucet, you can open up AI and work through it. And it might take you twice as long for the first time, but after 5 times, you'll be perfect.
Welcome back, everyone. Happy Sunday and welcome to Orange Peel. I am back today with Global HODL, and we are talking about the AI breakthrough of 2026. Is that bullish or is that bearish for Bitcoin? We're going to be zooming in on the massive capital shift that's happening right now. Now, if you aren't familiar with what's been going down this week in AI, Morgan Stanley is warning up a massive AI leap in the first half of 2026. Think April to maybe June-ish, with top labs throwing out unprecedented amounts of compute at models that could easily get roughly twice as capable. They're projecting nearly $3 trillion US in AI-related infrastructure investment by 2028. That means that's a ton of capital actively flowing into AI. At the same time, Bitcoin is hovering around 70K to 72-ish K this week, with spot ETFs seeing strong inflows recently, like I think it was about $458 million in a single day earlier in March, signaling that institutional money is rotating back into Bitcoin. A couple other things have happened this week, but we'll get into those later in this episode. Without further ado, Dad, welcome back to the show. How are you doing today? How are you doing this week?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, it's been a big week in terms of AI, and it's good to see that the Bitcoin price is back steady, sort of recovering from the past 5 months.
Yeah. Bitcoin has shown tremendous amount of strength in last couple of weeks, especially when the war started. Everybody was expecting Bitcoin would crash down to 50s, like 50,000, 40,000, whatnot. It would have done that in the past, but war practically has shown no impact on Bitcoin, whereas gold has crashed, S&P has crashed, everything else has crashed.
Oil.
Uh, Oil is going through the roof, so
Oil is.
but that's rightfully so, right? If you think
Yeah.
about it, right? 20% of oil flows through Strait of Hormuz, and Iran basically has chokehold on that, right? I think that's their bargaining chip for the future, and we can talk about that, if you're interested. But let's circle back to AI.
Yeah. Yeah, let's start with the big fat question then. Is all of this AI capital a tailwind essentially that will eventually lift Bitcoin, or is it a short-term, what's the word? Maybe headwind through correlation and reallocation?
So I think overall AI is going to be beneficial for Bitcoin. We've talked about that in the past. The choice of money for AI is going to be Bitcoin. There is no doubt
Okay.
about that. Now, the challenge we are seeing right now is multifold. One is because of what happened in AI in last 9 months. Like look at these shares or the stock price of SanDisk, Western Digital, some of the data center providers and whatnot. They were like just exponential, right? So what happened was a lot of people or a lot of capital would have moved away from Bitcoin, chasing better returns, better yield. Right? So a lot of people have taken money out of Bitcoin and moved there. And this is not specific to Bitcoin, it's entire crypto in general. Even the Mag 7, if you look at it, right? Even the Mag 7 is down, whereas some of these other companies are like 3, 4, 500% up in the last 6 months. Right? So there's definitely movement of capital in the short term. But in long run, if we stop looking at the price at a daily, weekly, monthly charts, if we if we can be patient for 5-10 years, AI is going to benefit Bitcoin in a big way.
Are you seeing more money going into AI right now, or do you think Bitcoin is still the long-term bet?
Uh, I think the tremendous amount of money has to go into AI, right? Think of it this way. When the internet started back in the day, a lot of money had to flow into building the infrastructure, like laying out those fiber optics under the seabed to give the connectivity infrastructure to the world, right? Without that, nothing on the internet that we enjoy today we would have been able to enjoy,
True.
right? It's practically that. So we are at that stage when it comes to AI. We are at the build out stage where a lot of money has to be poured into infrastructure. During this time, there will be several things that would not yield any meaningful result in the long run, and that would be just money wasted. Like any other innovation, things are tried, some work out, a lot of them don't. Right. So I believe there needs to be a ton of investment. And just to put things in perspective, just the 4 big tech companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, and Oracle, between them, they are putting in $600 billion in AI infrastructure this year alone. Like this year alone. So this infrastructure has to be built out. Without that, none of the promises of AI applications can actually be delivered. Because if there is no compute, no power, no bandwidth to run these models, what do we do?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's no secret that AI is driving a massive capital shift right now, right? We see, as I was talking about with the Morgan Stanley report, where they're saying we're on the edge of a nonlinear jump in AI capabilities, right? We've also seen Sam Altman at OpenAI, who just teased their new Spud model, and then they killed the Sora video project that had a partnership with Disney that was I think $1 billion worth. And all of these guys are making massive decisions right now that they are saying are really going to accelerate the AI economy. So, I mean, with trillions potentially, not even potentially, with trillions flowing into AI infrastructure, how do you see this capital shift affecting Bitcoin's role? Like, is it just going to stay steady? Is it becoming kind of the asset that balances out the AI hype spending?
I think AI, there are 2 different camps, at least in my head. Think of it this way. AI is a lot more about improving productivity, putting a ton of deflationary pressure on the economy. A ton. And at that point in time, Bitcoin is the strongest hedge because the governments will have to print a ton of money, a ton of money. There is no doubt about that the governments will have to print a ton of money. And if anybody thinks the $5 trillion they did just the United States during COVID was big, wait till the next one comes. Right? Next one is going to be monumentally bigger. Right? Now, it might not be one shot, it might be in chunks, but if you look at over a period of time, it will make any previous print look like a tiny baby, an infant, right? In that world, that's what will drive Bitcoin, not anything else. And then, as you know, again, I'm not a macro researcher or macro analyst, but based on my research and based on me listening to some of the big names in the industry, what I'm realizing is Bitcoin is driven by liquidity. Right now, the world is choked on liquidity.
Mhm.
Fed is not reducing interest rates. The war started. Energy prices are going up, right? So there is an inflationary pressure because of the oil prices rising. There is unemployment pressure because of AI. So Fed is between a rock and a hard place to, if they like because of job losses, they want to cut interest rates, but because of inflation kind of edging upwards because of the oil prices going higher, they will have to raise the rates to curb the inflation. Now that's a given story. Now that's a different story that when the prices of oil are changing because of a tension or a war, the changing of interest rate here are not going to do anything meaningful. But that aside, the liquidity is what is missing in the economy right now. That is what is putting a lot of pressure, along with AI sucking a lot of capital and not leaving much available for anything else. Right. So think if you were to think about this, like if you are a average Joe, you had $100 to invest. You open up the chart and you look at, oh, Bitcoin has only gone down in the last 6 months, right, from October 10th to now.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you look at SanDisk or SMH or any other AI name, they probably have gone much up. So you probably would be putting your capital towards AI,
Yeah.
right? So there's a lot of that psychology also.
But I mean, the AI driven capital shift is coming from institutional money, right? Like, it's not the average Joe putting their money into AI that's hyping it up this much, basically.
Sure, there is not like the two things that are happening. There is a lot of money from large enterprises, the hyperscalers, the Mag 7s, and the other big names. They are putting real money towards building this infrastructure out because they see no other way out. They see this as an existential threat,
Mm-hmm.
right? If let's say if Microsoft chooses that they're not going to put any money towards AI, and Google and Meta keep doing that, and if AI becomes successful, who needs Microsoft?
If AI becomes successful.
So why I say this is if AI becomes successful in delivering the full promise. AI is here to stay. There's no doubt about that. The promises are big. The timeline is short. The key thing is how much can it deliver in next 1, 2, 3 years? How much can it deliver in next 10, 20 years? If something is
Okay.
10, 20 years away, businesses don't have to worry about it. If something is 12 months away, they should be all hands on deck trying to figure out how do they compete with this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on AI agents driving on-chain activity for Bitcoin?
Uh, it will happen. But right now, I don't know of anybody who's giving access to their Bitcoin wallet to an AI agent.
That's true. Yeah.
Right now, sure, there are few examples, few people who have, given real credit cards to AI agents. There is a company that tried creating credit cards for AI agents. They work like a prepaid card, like you would give your
Mm-hmm.
teenager,
Yeah.
right? Where you can load up, okay, it's $100. Now AI agent can use this card up to the $100 and make purchases to do things that I've asked the agent to do. So there are
Mm-hmm.
some use cases like that, but I haven't seen people giving them access to their Bitcoin wallet, right? Yet. That's the key. I think the next step probably is going to be people will start giving them access to their own stablecoin access first
Mm-hmm.
instead of credit cards, because then you get rid of the complete rails of old payments system.
Mm-hmm.
If you give them a sort of a tether wallet or a circle wallet or any wallet that that has ability to store stable coins, then agents can transact using stable coins as the starting point. And then next step eventually is going to be when the scale becomes much larger, when the transaction cost becomes a fraction of a penny, that's when stablecoins fail. Right? If let's say I wanted to, like an AI agent wants to hit New York Times to get some news information, right? A New York Times subscription runs for whatever, like $5-6 a week or whatever that number is. AI agent doesn't need everything. It needs that one article at one point in time. So in that world, probably the transaction would happen as that, okay, I need that one article. Give me access to that one article. One article might cost a cent, 2 cents, maybe fraction of a cent, right? Depending on if I buy credits upfront or whatnot, however the pricing will work. And if the transaction cost, the unit cost goes much lower than a penny, stablecoins fail, right? Now, in that world, Bitcoin on layer one will not succeed because it
Mm-hmm.
cannot process transactions at that pace.
Mm-hmm.
In that world, either it has to be a layer two on top of Bitcoin, like Lightning or Liquid,
Mm-hmm.
or something else has to come along the way that gives that, sort of that gives capabilities to Bitcoin blockchain to handle transactions at that scale. Right?
Okay.
Now, that doesn't mean, like I want to reiterate, doesn't mean in any way that somebody has to build a new Bitcoin or a better Bitcoin. No, there is no such thing as better Bitcoin. There is Bitcoin, there is everything else. What, like Jeff Booth says, networks are built in layers.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is the layer one at the bottom of the layer. Everything doesn't need to talk to layer one. Like when you open a website and on internet, it doesn't know what is the lowest layer in the OSI model, right? A lot of things get handled at the higher layers, and only the thing that need to go to the layer one actually go there, right? So that's what I think eventually will happen.
Okay. Interesting. I'm wording my thoughts. Have you been seeing all the discourse recently on Twitter about the AI bubble?
I have, and there are some signs that suggest that there is a bubble, but I don't think
Yeah.
entire AI is bubble. Some parts of AI might be in a bubble.
Like what?
And there are, like what? There are some questions about this circular funding, like NVIDIA funding OpenAI funding somebody else again fund NVIDIA fund somebody
Yeah.
else, and they fund OpenAI, and OpenAI does it.
Yeah.
Like, so it's like, but basically I have $1 million, I give it to you in to basically say you're gonna like I'm gonna buy this from you, and then you give me that $1 million back and say I'm gonna buy that from you, right?
Yeah.
So magically we created $2 million, and but in reality we still have 1 million,
Yeah.
right? So that if you leave that part out, again, I don't know how is it really a bubble, because at the end of the day, that's how trade happens.
Mm-hmm.
I buy from you, you buy from me. That's how trade happens. That's what economic activity is, right?
Yeah.
I I personally think if you want me to do some predictions, my prediction is one of these big LLM names is going to go bust in next 12 to 18 months.
Do you have your bets on which one?
Nah, I'm not. I'm going to reserve the right to say which one. But I believe that is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the event that will bring some scrutiny in this world. Now, does that mean one of the Mag 7s are going to go bankrupt? Hell no. Not going to happen. Right? They
Mm-hmm.
have plenty of money. They have plenty of revenues. So I don't think they are going to go bankrupt. Right? Would one or two of the Mag 7s will get hurt? Probably. Right? So, like each one of them has its own strengths. So it's very hard to say which ones will get hurt first, but I believe one or two of them will get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I think there are things like these tiny startups that started building some on top of a certain model and then became like 100 million, 200, 250 million ARR and then valuation of $2 billion and whatnot. A lot of them will go belly up. This is like pets.com and in the .com era. Where the real value, like we haven't started materializing the real value of AI yet.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of value of AI right now is I'm going to build this website, I'm going to build that website, I'm going to build this image, I'm going to build this YouTube script or this image or write this blog post and whatnot. The real breakthrough of AI will come when it will produce some material output that you would have needed other human to do otherwise. For example, the day you can fire your financial planner or wealth manager and have a AI-driven, financial advisor, basically an AI agent who understands what your needs are, who understands what your goals are, lives up to the fiduciary duty that it has, and has no incentive to sell you anything that pays it more commissions because AI agent doesn't get any commission from anybody.
Right.
Unlike today, a lot of financial planners would promote stuff to you that gives them the most commission. Right? For example, lifelong insurances. Not everybody needs a lifelong insurance. Right? Annuities. There is a very small, tiny use case for annuity. In general, nobody should need an annuity. Right? So there are some of these things which will feed a ton of commissions to these sales. At the end of the day, financial manager is not, our financial advisor is not an advisor to you. They are salespeople for the products that give them the most commission.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The day that happens, AI becomes useful. The day AI can do taxes for you without needing your CPA accurately, not missing anything, not hallucinating, that's when AI is becoming valuable. Now you don't have to pay $500, $1,000 to your CPA. Your AI agent can do it for you much faster. You can iterate as many times as you want, specifically focused on you and not anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, a lot of people are able to do a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about, but it's not ready for prime time. Not everybody can just go to AI and one prompt it. Like you cannot basically say, here are all my documents. Like here are my 1099s, here's my W-2, here's my previous tax return. Can you prepare the tax return for me for this year? It asks you 5 or 6 questions and then prepares the return for you. No, it doesn't, right? So that level of value generation has not happened yet. That will happen.
What do we need to accomplish next in order for that to happen?
I think two things that need to happen. One is the compute needs to be available. Sure, a lot of money is being poured, but we don't have enough compute. We don't have enough power.
That is true.
Right? Our power bill is going up for the last 18 months.
Yeah.
Right? Our usage
Supply and
hasn't
demand,
changed.
right?
Our usage hasn't changed, but our bill is up 25, 30%. So both of these things need to happen, and they will take their own sweet time. So today,
Mhm.
all the limits that all these providers put on you, they're not because they're greedy. They're primarily because they don't have enough compute. They don't have enough power, right? So that is the first thing. The second thing that needs to happen is right now, all these LLMs, they are sort of a catch-all. They are large things. You can throw anything random at that, and they do a decent job. But when it comes to these specific jobs, in real world, you cannot take a security guard and ask them to do your tax return. You would not trust them. Maybe they'll do a good job, but you would not trust them. You would need a CPA for that. You would not go to your plumber and say, hey, can you help me build my financial plan or my retirement plan? You're not going to do that. Right? They might do a good job, but you won't trust them. And the reason is because they don't have the specific training, they don't have the specific skill set to do the job that you need them to do. Right? So in real life, if you come draw a comparison, there is this idea of handyman, where if you
Mhm.
need to do something small, you'll call the handyman. Oh, I need to hang this painting here. This wall needs a little bit of touch-up paint. This door is not closing properly. Can you fix the alignment and whatnot? Fine. But when it comes to something major, you'll call the specific person, right? You will call a plumber, electrician, a framing guy, or a roofing guy, or a yard person for whatever you need specifically, right? You would not ask your handyman to do anything big. It's the same thing with LLMs today. LLMs are the handyman. They have skills for everything, but somebody needs to hone in and say, I need to specifically focus on this skill and advance the training to make it better for this specific task. And that will
But
happen.
but AI goes so much further beyond just LLMs. Right,
Correct.
even though LLMs might not be able to be experts in an area, AI can be.
Correct. But, so let's just tease apart what do people mean when they think about AI? Majority of people, when they think about AI, they think of ChatGPT.
That's true, yeah,
That's
they
what
think
AI
Gen
for them
AI.
is, right?
Yeah.
You rightly said that's generative AI,
Mhm.
right? AI has been in existence much before that. It was known as machine learning, but if you have used any type of feed, either news, social media, YouTube, Netflix, they all used machine learning to determine what would you want to read, watch next,
Mhm.
right? Now, when people say AI, they think of generative AI, and generative AI is nothing but a machine learning, a subset of that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I think in the real world, there are two parts of AI that need to happen. There is a digital part, which is generative AI. There's a physical part, which is robotics, self-driving cars, and anything of that sort,
Mhm.
right? We have made a good progress on digital AI, not so much on physical AI, right? We have self-driven car, but only in parts of the country only primarily with Tesla. Right? That too, they still require you to sit on the driver's seat. Right? A completely autonomous driving is only available
Yeah.
in I think this
Waymo.
primarily Austin, and Tesla has
Yeah.
some testing in
Yeah.
Austin and maybe a couple of other places in the country. Right? We do not have the compute and power to support everything that physical AI will potentially be able to do in the future. Right? So power is our biggest hurdle today. That is something that this country needs to solve. Otherwise, America is done.
How would you even solve the power problem?
It's a 40-year debt that we have to repay. Like for 40 years, we were complacent.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't do anything. While the rest of the world, especially China, made a tremendous amount of progress.
Yeah.
Now, there's no catch up. Like it's not that we can open up tomorrow and then something we can generate as much power as we need tomorrow, right? Building a power plant, especially the nuclear ones, requires build outs, requires unfortunately a ton of regulations,
Mm-hmm.
right? And building them is not easy. Building a nuclear power plant is not easy. It requires a specific type of skill set. We don't have that skill set, right? So all those challenges need to be solved. So we need to deregulate. We need to put a ton of money, ton of effort in building the infrastructure out, and we have to give us due course time. The challenge is we are also short on time. Other countries, including China, ain't slowing down, right? So they are not slowing down.
I don't want to get too much into the war, like the AI war between the US and China in this episode. I think we can save that for another episode. But what I do want to talk about is the intersection of Bitcoin and AI. Like, what is Bitcoin's edge in an AI capital world, right? So, I guess to articulate in, like, I think in a proper question, in a world where people and money are chasing AI productivity, why does Bitcoin still serve as a long-term store of value?
Yeah. Let me ask you a simple question. Is there any world that you think where the governments will stop spending money?
No, of course not.
Exactly. That's the answer. So what happens in a world that is driven by AI? There is a tremendous deflationary pressure on the economy. In a good way. In a good way. Everything's
Yeah.
is gonna get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Like imagine cost of everything, incremental cost of everything is trending towards zero. Not actually zero, but just trending towards zero. The only real cost would be the cost of power it takes to produce, cost of power and
Yeah.
maybe cost of compute, right? But given our governments across the world are so addicted to spending money, there is no world where they can stop that, right? And over last 30, 40 years, especially in the Western world, where the governments have trained people to be dependent on the government. What happens when AI does a lot more work, but requires a far less number of humans? People don't have jobs. Right? A lot of people will need to get reskilled, right? To actually get jobs, which is not going to happen that easily. So governments, to keep their vote banks, to keep running all the random BS programs that they keep starting, they will keep doing two things. They will keep printing money and they'll keep crying, tax the rich, tax the rich, tax the rich. And we are seeing the starting of that.
Starting?
It's starting. So there are three things that are happening right now. California has a 5% billionaire tax.
Yeah.
So that was California. Bernie Sanders is trying to make it at a federal level. Elizabeth Warren, proposed a bill today where she is talking about 2 cents on every dollar above $50 million and 3 cents on every dollar above $1 billion. And then she's saying,
Jeez.
with all this tax, essentially think of this like 2% or 3% wealth tax,
Yeah.
right? And what she's saying is, with this money, we'll be able to fund all this stuff. Like, she's a big list of things. What is going to happen? All the wealthy people will leave. That's exactly what's going to happen, right? So these are the two things that are going to happen. And the other thing to think about is, with AI, AI is pushing us towards a world of abundance. Everything is abundant, right? We can build as many houses as we want. The only scarce thing is land.
Yeah.
But we can go up. So cost of an apartment should fall off a cliff, right? Cost of food should fall off a cliff because we'll be able to
It
produce.
should.
Yes, and that will happen. But because governments will keep printing money, your dollar would still be losing value. And in that word, scarcity is the only thing that will hold value. And what is the most scarce as a resource in the world? After time. You can't
It's
buy time.
Bitcoin.
It's Bitcoin.
Okay, what I want to ask, I raise you this situation, right? We now live in an AI world. AI is driving the prices of everything down. AI is bringing the price of everything down, but inflation is going up, and inflation is rising faster than the deflation coming with AI, right? Doesn't that just create a scenario where, for us, we're still not getting the benefits of AI's deflation?
AI has not put the deflationary pressure yet. As I said, AI is still in the digital form.
Is the digital form not going to bring deflation?
Not in everything. Digital AI doesn't do anything to the pricing of houses. You
True.
can't build a house with LLM. You need a robot for that.
So what will digital AI bring deflation to?
The desk workers, right? Today, if you want to build a website, you don't have to hire a software engineer.
True, yeah.
Anybody can build a website today by just getting a $20 subscription. Sure, you might hit the limits, but over the course of a few days, you should be able to get what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you want to, you don't want like waiting, you just get a $200 max subscription, and probably you can one-shot it in a matter of few hours.
Yeah. Fair. But the situation that this is creating is digital AI is bringing the cost of labor down for companies. But for the
Not all
average
companies, though.
person,
Not all companies, though. If the
well,
company is a
most tech
manufacturing
companies.
company, yes. But tech companies, so imagine what is happening in tech companies. Let's take example, Amazon, Meta, whatever, right? Sure, they can produce a lot more code with less number of people, so they're letting people go.
Yeah.
But they're putting billions of dollars in building the infrastructure.
Oh, that's
Right?
true. So they're
So they
not as
cannot
profitable
pass
as they
that benefit
seem.
today to the customer.
Yeah.
They have to continue to raise prices of doing what they need to do. Right? And
Yeah.
look at what is happening to all the subscriptions, right? I still remember when Netflix started streaming, it was $7.99. It was like what, $27.99, something like
Yep.
that.
Yep.
In 15, 16 years, we have gone from $8 to $28.
And it went from just being Netflix to now having Netflix and all of its competitors. So in reality, the price for the consumer has risen
Yeah,
so much to
exactly.
stream.
Exactly.
This is what I'm
And most of
saying.
the time, people
It
don't
seems
even
like
watch all the things, right? So you have
also
multiple
true.
subscription, you don't want to watch everything.
Well, yeah, you're just doing it so you have the optionality, but that's besides the point, right? What I'm trying to say now is this is just creating a reality where the consumer, the average person, is now paying so much more to essentially cover the cost of the companies opting towards digital AI.
Yes and no, right?
Okay.
Eventually, like how does companies make money? Companies make money because customers buy their products. That generates revenues. Revenue generates profits. Profits get reinvested. Company grows, makes more revenue, generates more profit, and the cycle goes on. Right? That's a normal economic activity. Right? Because if you don't keep any room for generating profit for the company, there is no incentive for them to do it. Right? And the way typically it works is, in economics, we call it willingness to pay. Like you think a customer thinks, what is the utility value to me? That is the maximum I want to pay. As long as the price is less than that, they're okay. They feel they got a
Hmm.
good deal.
Yeah.
And if the company can keep their cost of manufacturing much lower than what their maximum willingness to pay is,
Hmm.
they can kind of pocket that gap in between those two data points, right? So continuing this further, I believe what will also happen in AI, that the amount of money that is needed to build this out will require a government backing. Companies alone won't be able to fund it. Won't be able to do everything that we need to do. Right? Not possible. Realistically, not possible without going in tremendous amount of debts. And we saw what is happening with Oracle, which generated a lot of debt, and their credit default swap ratings fell, and the premiums went through the roof and whatnot. So I think eventually some of these companies will go running back to the government and say, "Hey, a little help
We need
here."
help. Yeah.
And I won't be surprised because banks have been doing this for multiple decades. Right? We saw what happened in global financial crisis. Banks took unreasonable amounts of risk. And when the risk blew, the banks went running to the government. Governments bailed them out. Who ended up paying for it? The consumers, the citizens of the country. I think that will happen. That will be one driver of the print. That I was saying. So that will be one driver for sure. Right? The Morgan Stanley report talked about $3 trillion in investment. Do you think that all these companies can foot the bill of $3 trillion and more
No.
on their own? Not going to happen.
No, that's
Not going to
actually
happen.
something I was gonna bring up later.
Right? So I think it would require some sort of government backing.
Yeah.
Question is when. I think that comes pretty soon, maybe end of this year, maybe early next year. They can't wait. Like companies can't wait because who knows after the 2028 election,
Yeah.
which government is in power and does the government support AI build out or
AI.
not?
Yeah, you could have a very anti-AI government,
Yep. Right. Same
which
thing
would
applies to
be
crypto.
detrimental to America.
Uh, the funny thing is, I was listening to Balaji today. He went on Tom Bilyeu, and I can't get this thought out of my head. He said it in multiple places where he said, America is not America anymore. But today he made a
Mm-hmm.
good reference. And the reference was, he was like somebody saying, I'm a Korean, right? To everybody sitting outside of Korea, if somebody says I'm a Korean, we'll by default think the person is South Korean,
Yeah.
right? But are North Koreans not Koreans?
No, they are.
Right? So that's
But
exactly what is happening in the country. The country is right now Blue America, MAGA, internet tech, right? That's what is happening. So there are like
yeah.
3 or 4 different tribes, as he
Yeah.
calls it, right? And none of these tribes talks to each other. They are all at a tension with others and pulling them away. Right? Blue America has hated internet and tech for decades, and especially in the last 10, 15 years, right? And because they lost or they basically suffered big setbacks because of internet, they lost control of media. Like before that, they controlled all media, all news channels, all big publications. They just controlled it everywhere, right? Red America controlled manufacturing completely. Red America already lost to China 30, 40 years ago, right? Blue America lost to internet in last 20 years. So earlier it was red versus blue. Now it's red versus blue versus internet versus China. It's a 4-way war. And what Balaji is predicting is it's going to be a 2-way war. It will be internet versus China.
Mm.
Right. So the
Internet
point I
versus
was trying to
China.
make here is the reason why I brought this up is whichever way we go, we are not a single country anymore. We are not America. You're either Red America, you're Internet America, or the MAGA. You're one of those. And I think if I were to choose in that, I would rather choose the Internet America.
China versus the internet. China versus the entire internet.
And think about this, like why this is true. This is true because China has put a firewall between what their people can and cannot see. So total freedom versus completely state-owned. Control versus freedom is the fight, and China will always choose control over freedom, and internet is always about freedom over control. Right? You can be blocked by one company if you're sitting in America. That was happening when people were getting canceled on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and if you get canceled on one platform, you go to another one.
Yeah.
Right? Now you can go to Nostr. There's nobody can cancel you.
Yeah, true. Let's circle back to what we were talking about in the beginning of the episode with the war that's happening right now and how Bitcoin's been kind of stagnant and how that's a really, really good thing for Bitcoin. For starters, why is it a good thing for Bitcoin?
I think Bitcoin does a good job of smelling things out faster than any other asset.
Yeah, it
Right?
behaves like a tech stock. I think tech stocks are also pretty good at.
No, tech stocks, it behaves
Really?
like a tech stock. Think about it, what is happening. In last 3 weeks or so that the war has been going on, tech stocks are down 5 to 10%. Bitcoin is flat. Goes up 2%, comes down 2%, goes up 2%, goes down 2%, floating between the 68 and 72K range. Not moving. Not breaking above, not breaking below. Touch wood. Now it might happen right after we finish talking or during when we are talking. So we don't have a crystal ball. But I think there is some sense that is going on in the world. People are like countries, and a lot of people are losing faith in dollar. That
Yeah, we
was
spoke about
happening.
this. Yeah.
That was happening over last multiple years. I think that thing is becoming much and much clearer to people. And we see that every time Treasury tries to go out and sell more treasuries, and then there are no buyers and whatnot. So they call that crap that happens. I think what happened with this war is it kind of showed. So right now we are in this weird place.
Yeah.
What you're hearing on the media and from all from the leaders like Trump and Netanyahu is, we will do this, we will do that, a lot of threats and whatnot. And Iran is showing them middle finger and saying, get lost.
Yeah.
Like US sent them a peace bill yesterday. Iran today said, nope, get lost. I think what Iran has found out during this, which I think is going to be a big thing moving forward, is they found that 30 or 35-kilometer wide Strait of Hormuz is a good chokehold for Iran, and that is the real nuclear weapon they have. Sure, US doesn't get a lot of stuff that passes through that. So US doesn't get impacted. But the entire Asia, including China, a lot of oil supplies from there goes through that. Right? So I think what is happening because of that is everybody is realizing this war is not going to be Russia-Ukraine war that's going to go for years. No. And primarily because America cannot afford to fight forever. We don't have the resources, we don't have the weapons, we don't have anything. All we can do is just threaten. Right? So what would rather happen is there would be some sort of negotiation which will be along the lines of all the US bases in the Middle East will have to be removed, right? Basically, the US will be told that go back home, live on your side of the world, and be a regional power. You don't have to be a world power anymore, right? And since US and Israel have caused a lot of damage in the country, they will demand some sort of compensation. The compensation most likely will come from, okay, this Strait of Hormuz, this we will control. And I think they basically said that yesterday. They want sovereignty over that. Like they want total control of that passage. And they probably would think of it like a toll. Like every ship that passes through it has to pay us some money. And we'll use that money to build out the country again. And just think about how much, like if the 20% of the world's energy moves through that, if they put a tiny percentage of toll on that, it's a shitload of money, right? They have nuclear weapons. Israel has nuclear weapons. They will probably shake hands and say, sign a peace treaty and say, you know what? Live and let live. All sanctions on Iran will be gone. Right? Like sanctions on Russia are slowly unwinding, as we have seen in the past. And Iran would become a superpower in that region along with Israel. Right? So the thing that US has been providing to Middle East, like countries like Saudi, Bahrain, and
Qatar. Yeah.
the basis there is like, okay, you know what, we will provide the protection. In return, you make investments in the US. I'm worried about those investments now. If US is not providing them the protection, what are they going to give back? Like, why would they make investments there? And also, these are the countries who are also moving all this oil and other stuff through that passage. If they have to foot that bill of the toll, that money has to come out from somewhere else. Yeah.
Where's that money coming from, Dad?
That money is most likely going to come from, okay, we're going to reduce the investment in the US.
What does
So
that mean for Americans?
now this is an important question. If the foreign investment in US capital markets and US assets reduces or starts flowing back home, asset prices in the US will crash. And in a hyper financialized economy like United States, it's going to be a disaster. Right? That's the second reason why I think the governments will have to print. That is also the reason why the current administration is trying to get behind crypto and put regulations around them instead of banning them. Like we talked on a previous episode, all stable coins have to be backed by treasury. If the demand of crypto increases, which it will, demand for treasury will hold, that will give room to the US government to keep printing. Right? So I'm a strong believer of a saying that I heard somewhere where it's like, if you buy a stock, the stock goes to zero or stock falls 20%, that's your problem. If S&P falls 20%, that's United States government problem. Right? So I think US government will give it its fair share of fight. And I also think that a lot of these countries won't move money out completely. It might be a gradual move. But I can also see a shock in terms of less future investments. Right? So in this world, like my thinking is focus on holding scarcity and nothing else. Right? Especially for your generation, just focus on holding scarcity. If somebody wants to be in real estate, buy land, don't buy apartments. If you want to hold precious metals, buy gold, nothing else. Better yet, just buy Bitcoin.
What does the conflict in the Middle East right now with Iran mean for de-dollarization? Are we going to see sort of a faster push now for the USD losing world reserve status?
Probably not. And what we are seeing is, ever since the war started, the dollar is gaining strength compared to against
Yeah.
other currencies.
Yeah.
Right? So, and the prime reason for that is majority of the world, even today, feels dollar is flight to safety. Because not everybody understands what's going on. If you ask an average American, or they have no idea that we are in $39 trillion of debt.
That is true.
Right? If you ask an average Australian, if they had a choice, they want an Australian dollar versus an American dollar, they will pick
Right
American
now,
dollar.
you want the American dollar.
Right? Not right now. Like for them, like they don't understand what's going on. Right? If anything wrong they see happening in and around them, they'll run to dollar. Right? So this whole thesis will take probably 10, 15, 20 years to play out, maybe. Right? Now, the savior in this is if US can actually gain and maintain lead in AI. And my feeling is we might be able to maintain it in digital AI. but we'll fail in physical AI. We are miles behind.
There's not much except for Tesla.
Yeah, but
Except
if you,
for Tesla, there's
yeah,
not much investment going into physical AI in the US at all. We have Waymo in San Francisco, but Waymo is also Chinese, isn't it?
no, Waymo is owned by Google.
Is it?
Waymo was acquired by Google many years ago.
Okay.
But the challenge with the Waymo is the cost of ownership of Waymo is too high, right? Because they use all those radars and whatnot. Like they are not
Yeah.
using cameras like Tesla.
Yeah.
But if you go to neutral countries, right? Like any place where China can sell their cars without going through much duties and much friction, right? BYD is making Tesla run circles, and Tesla is the best autonomous electric car, right? So if you go to China, like China, they are already testing out autonomous trucks and bunch of other stuff. Like we are nowhere close, nowhere
Yeah.
close.
I think the information asymmetry here is just insane. I think the amount that China knows about the US and the developments that are happening in the US versus what we know about the developments that are happening in China. And it's always been this way, but it's an unfair advantage if it's in this competition that we've got running.
Yeah, information is valuable, right? And if
Yeah.
information flow is only one way, like you saw what happened with SMCI, right? One of their senior officials got caught smuggling NVIDIA chips to China.
Yeah.
Like that's the kind of reach they have. Like it was not a random person who they sent from China go buy chips from US and bring them back. Like
Yeah.
a senior executive of SMCI smuggling NVIDIA chips. Like that's ridiculous. So like I strongly feel that China will win the physical AI race, and I think their digital AI, their LLMs are giving a very decent fight to all the Anthropics and OpenAIs of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I'm realizing is I think China feels that software is not where the moat would be. The moat would be in the physical world, right? Anybody can build software, and that's the reason. Like all their models, they're open source.
Source.
Now there could be things in there where if you're using their models, they might be using that data to train their models and make their models better. Um,
But
I don't
anything you
know.
put on the internet anyway is being used to train the models.
Yeah,
So
but what I'm saying is, let's say you download one of their models and you're running on your local machine using Olama or LM Studio or
yeah.
something like that. Ideally not, because open source, anybody could look through the code and figure out what the hell is happening. Like they could be bouncing the data through multiple places and whatnot. So I really don't know. Um, but I think the future for America looks very bleak, to be honest.
Well, isn't that pessimistic?
Um, yeah, you can call it pessimistic, but I would call it more realistic. And the way I see it is, and I'm guilty as charged, like being in this country, we were fooled by our past success for way too long. Like so much so that we became complacent. We completely lost sight of what are we doing? Are we taking the right steps? Are we going in the right direction? Right? And this direction did not change 5 years ago. This probably changed 40 years ago. right? And like as they say, when a plane starts, even if it goes off by 1 degree, you don't notice it for quite long.
But when you're off course. Yeah.
And that's what we are realizing now. And the key thing is, not everybody realizes, governments are not realizing, and that's the reason we are behaving like smaller countries within a country and not like as one country. If we operate like one country, if everybody comes together and says, doesn't matter blue, doesn't matter red, doesn't matter internet, doesn't matter versus China, doesn't matter, we are Americans, we should focus on making sure America wins and do all the right things, we will still be okay. The challenge is red and blue, or MAGA versus blue, is still busy fighting, and it's going to be a disaster.
So to bring it back to a positive note, while America is being America, what can we do to protect ourselves in the coming years? Let's talk about that.
Yes. Gain the skills, gain hard skills, build critical thinking. Critical thinking is going to be most important skill. Everything else you can learn by talking to AI. Like if you don't know how to fix a leaking faucet, you can open up AI and work through it. And it might take you twice as long for the first time, but after 5 times, you'll be perfect. Like perfect example, I've been baking bread and AI is my guide. Like every time I bake something, I take a picture and say, hey, what do you think? How do you rate it? What's wrong? What's right? And it looks at that and says, oh, it looks like your hydration wasn't up to the mark. The oven spring is less and this and that and whatnot. And then it grades me. It's like, I'm not going to a school to learn how to bake bread. Right? So these are the things that you can do with AI today. But critical thinking is something which I cannot teach you. Right? That you have to actively practice. Second thing is be a builder. Build things, add value. Take that value and buy scarcity, buy Bitcoin. Third thing is be nimble. Don't be tied to a place. Right? Find your community, find your tribe, and be open to go be the part of the tribe. And fourth thing, physical security is more important than financial security. Right? Those are the only 4 things that matter. This is not the time for anybody to say, I am going to fight for the country. Let the country realize that it's a country first. Right? I'm not fighting for red versus blue. If we have to fight for America, I will. But I'm not fighting, oh, you are MAGA, so I'm going to fight for like blue versus MAGA, or you are internet, I'm going to fight with like blue versus internet. No, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, well, to sum things up for the listeners, so far we've talked about the massive AI breakthrough and capital shift that is not only incoming, but has also kind of started to happen in 2026, which will potentially supercharge AI's productivity. But we've also discussed a little bit about the possibility of an AI bubble and what areas of AI that will occur in. If you guys missed it, remember we talked about those 2 different parts of AI. We have digital AI and physical AI, both equally as important. And then we talked about where America stood in both of those AI camps. Then we got into talking about the war, and we got into talking about America's divide, and then our war with China, or our, I don't want to say Cold War, because it's somewhat of a Cold War, but it's more like a digital war, like an internet war. The AI arms race is probably the best term for what's going on between the US and China at the moment. And then to bring it all back home, we just went through the most important things that you could do to secure yourself in a time of global uncertainty, because you might be watching this and you might not be sitting in the US and thinking, oh, I'm safe. This is only going to affect America. What affects America will inevitably affect the rest of the world. It's just a matter of time. So, with that, Dad, do you have anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, I would add one thing. I read a post this week, and that said one thing which is very, very interesting. And that basically said the rate of change in AI is to a point where it's disorienting today. If you just try to catch up with what's happening in AI every day, it's more than a full-time job just to keep track of anything. So at this point in time, my advice to anybody who's listening, stop worrying about what is a better model, which is the best thing, blah, blah, blah. Pick one and learn it. Right?
What's your model of
4.5
choice?
versus 4.6 versus incoming 4.7 on Anthropic, or 5.3, 5.4 on GPT doesn't matter. Pick one, stick with it, give it some time, try it, find the gotchas, find the strengths, make sure figure out what works for you and what doesn't, instead of trying to find the best model to do whatever. There's nothing called the best model.
True. Is the one that you've picked, have you figured out what it's good for and what it's not yet?
For most of the things now, I'm using Anthropic, Claude, primarily because I am building a bunch of stuff, and I found Claude Code is better at coding. Now, I'm not saying others are bad. I haven't tried them. It works for what I'm doing. And that's where I started. So I'm going to continue with that.
Yeah, just pick one and stick to it at that point.
Exactly, right? The only place I am using OpenAI, I don't use Gemini a lot these days, I'm noticing. The only place I use OpenAI compared to Claude is whatever code Claude generates, I basically make OpenAI sit down and say, review the code, find all the problems you can, security issues, performance issues, memory leaks, whatever it is, find it out, create a report, show it to me. Right? So that's what I'm doing. The other thing I'm realizing is learning how to manage the session or the context in AI is super important. Super important. Like, you start on Claude Code, very soon you realize, like, when the session starts hitting like 50%, you start realizing, or the context start hitting 50%, it will start blowing smoke. It will start making shit up. Right? So that is an important part, but that you learn as you go through it. For basic stuff, you don't need to worry.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, I hope that's a good action step for you guys after watching this episode. Pick an AI model and stick to this. But also, if you're still watching this and you're still someone who is anti-AI, who is not willing to just give it a shot, I understand where you're coming from. I understand the reasons you might be opposed to AI. But if this conversation has not cemented the fact that if you do not start learning, start working with it now, you will get left behind in the next few years. Not even in the next few years. With the rate that AI is accelerating, you are going to get left behind by the end of this year. Then I don't know much. I don't know what else I can say. I mean, it's really a choice of, is getting left behind something that you're okay with, so that you can stick so firmly to what you believe and what you stand for. It's up to you. Anyway, thanks, Dad, for coming back on. And if you're watching this, Let me know what you thought in the comments of today's episode. Did you like it? Did you not like it? It was a little heavier hitting than the previous ones that we've been doing in this AI series. Our last one was a Bitcoin one, actually, so I should say in this Build with AI, Protect with Bitcoin series. If you remember some of our older Satoshi Sunday episodes, this is very, very close to that. On this note, if you were interested in today's conversation, you want to hear more, there is one that my dad and I did on de-dollarization a few weeks ago. This was early February, I believe, and I will link that for you guys to check out because I think that's an incredible follow-up if you were interested in this one. With that being said, stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay orange-pilled. I'm your host, Nikki. This is my dad, and we will both see you next week on Sunday.